Welcome back to Texas in Focus. My guest on the program is former Houston City Councilwoman Amanda Edwards. Amanda Edwards is running for Congress in Texas's 18th Congressional District. Amanda, thank you so much for joining the program.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. So let's start with this. Running for office is hard. Being a public official is hard. What about this current moment makes you say, I accept that challenge. Despite all of that, I want to get involved and I want to run?
I've had the great fortune of having the opportunity to speak to so many residents across the district in these last several months. And one thing that has been just resoundingly clear is that so many of them have stated that they're ready for change. They feel shut out. They want to see a reason to be optimistic. And I think that there is a deep sense of disconnect right now in our national politics that I am seeking to help address and bridge, because I think that we have to be in a space where not only do we respond to the lingering challenges that we face, but we also have to seize the opportunities for tomorrow as well. And so really getting some fresh new leadership with a new perspective, different lens, different way of solving some of these lingering challenges in there, but also with a renewed focus on people. I think oftentimes the politics have really gotten in the way and trumped, from a priority standpoint, the impact that we need to be having on people and their families and their communities. And so bringing that voice to the table at a time like this, I often say I don't necessarily end up in places where I'm most comfortable. I go to the spaces where I'm most needed. And I think we need that type of voice in a time like this, where there's so much gridlock, so much dysfunction happening in Washington.
And let's talk about some of those spaces where you've been needed, because, what about your previous life, particularly your time on the city council, has prepared you to be in Congress?
Politics is not for the faint of heart. That's for sure. And it's about being creative in terms of, in environments where you may not necessarily have a majority. How do you navigate them so that you still have impact? And so I'm someone who has chosen to devote my time to public service because I have a deep desire to have impact in the community. And so with that said, that's how I want people to judge me. And when I became one of the city council members, for example, I'll never forget 6 years ago, something called Harvey hit our community. And of course, that was something that resulted in 51 inches of rainfall, $125 billion worth of damage. It was the second worst disaster in American history at that time. And one of the things that I learned from that experience was that it was absolutely required of me. There was no rubric of what to do in a situation like that. I learned that a lot of our seniors weren't getting the help they needed. So I rolled up my sleeves and we mobilized hundreds of volunteers, and we just got to work. And so many of them needed help getting their walls removed that had been soiled by the flood water that otherwise, if you didn't, would result in mold manifesting. And so we just had to get to work and be responsive to the needs of the community. And it was just a very eye-opening experience in terms of, sometimes with leadership, it's not always what you set out to do. It's sometimes your ability to fill in the gaps of and where the needs are in the community, and be nimble in that approach. And so that's been something that I have learned along the course, is that there's not always a blueprint. And you've got to be flexible, you've got to be nimble, you've got to be creative, but you also have to focus on the people. And sometimes that's at odds with the politics, and you've got to have the to put the people first each and every single time.
And of course, this campaign has required you to be nimble. You get in this race, the longtime incumbent Sheila Jackson-Lee is getting out of the race to run for mayor. After she loses the race for mayor, she gets back in. At that point, there's a choice for you to make, to defer or to say, I already have all this support, all these people counting on me, and double down. And you're in the race for the long haul. So tell me your thinking as the longtime incumbent got back in the race.
We got in the race. So a little more backstory there. So I started off in the mayor's race. And so that's where I started. And the Congresswoman made a decision to get in the mayor's race. And then I pivoted into the 18th Congressional District race. And once we made that pivot and really kind of locked in, I knew that the community was ready for change and they were excited about change in Washington. And as I got to work, talking to people, listening to them, tailoring solutions around the issues that mattered most to them, it was very, very clear to me that it was a deep desire for there to be a shift. And as a result, there was never a question as to whether I would leave the race for the 18th Congressional District. The people were overwhelmingly excited about this opportunity for new leadership for the district. And so we've been able, gratefully, to just have this very broad cross section of supporters all across the district, really talking about how we can go about solving some of the challenges that are lingering, but also how we can take this moment and think about what's possible for our community and send in a new set of solutions and approaches that are necessary to get this done. So I did not, anticipate necessarily that would be the way that this would turn out, but I didn't rule that out either. And so we were going to be prepared for any scenario. And that's what politics requires you to be is nimble and prepared and ready to go and address the challenges head on.
And when running against a longtime incumbent, of course, Sheila Jackson-Lee's been in Congress since 1995, when I was 2 years old. How do you call for generational change, but, still be respectful of the incumbent service? Have you found that line in your campaign?
Absolutely. I've worked for the Congresswoman, so I am very aware of her dedicated service to the 18th Congressional District, and we are grateful for her service. I just think that just like anything, there comes a time, and I think this time now requires a different approach, a different perspective in terms of how to deal with some of these lingering challenges that we've just not been able to resolve, but also how do we now move the needle forward? How do we open the next chapter up and really seize the opportunity before us? And I think having a proactive vision that involves really having an emphasis on the future is something that the community deeply desires. And so there is absolutely nothing wrong with acknowledging the service, the work, the dedication that someone has provided to the district, such as Congresswoman, but at the very same time saying and acknowledging that the time now is different and it requires a different perspective, a different approach. And that is absolutely what democracy should be about. And sometimes I think we forget that the seat doesn't belong to the person who's serving in it. The seat actually belongs to the people of that district, and it's up to them to decide when it's time for someone new or someone different to be in that seat. And so we have to kind of take a step back sometimes. We get attached to things in ways that obviously assign a person to them, but understanding what democracy is that those seats don't ever belong to the politician. They never have, they never will. They always will belong to the people. And it's totally within anyone's right in the 18th Congressional District to say, thank you for your years of service. And here's where I think we need to go on a going forward basis. And I think that's what the people of the 18th are going to say.
And if you're elected to serve those people of the 18th Congressional District, I wonder what some of your priorities for Houston, for Texas, for the country would be. If I asked you, if I told you you would only be able to get one thing done your
Oh,
first
don't
term in
say one
Congress,
thing.
what,
I'm going to be
what
really effective. So we're going to get a lot of things done.
if, well, keeping in mind that we're gonna try to get a lot of things done, but if there was one thing in particular that's near and dear to your heart, what would one issue you really want to get done be?
Some of the stuff is real meat and potato stuff that I talk about. And when I was growing up, my dad was very ill. He got diagnosed when I was about 10 years old with something called multiple myeloma. And I'll never forget it. He passed when I was 17 years old, but I learned what our US healthcare system was or wasn't by virtue of me asking my dad questions about whether his life-saving treatments would be covered by this insurance stuff that I was learning about. And I just never forget, I asked, well, what happens if they say no to this? And my dad would say things like, well, we just have to figure something else out. And at an early age, that was just part of the fundamental understanding of public service and government and systems and policy. And I knew that that answer was not the right one. And I knew that we needed to have systems in place that actually worked for people like my dad, worked for people like our family, worked for people in the community, that they wouldn't have to say something like we would have to figure something else out when dealing with matters of life and death. And so I say all of that to say access to healthcare is just such a just core fundamental element that we have got to make sure we start to really resume addressing. I think we, took the step one with the Affordable Care Act, but it was never intended for the Affordable Care Act as it was initially presented to just stop and rest there. It just got kind of marred in a lot of politics and lawsuits, and we haven't really fine-tuned and gotten more people the adequate coverage that they need. There are a lot of people who have gotten coverage as a result, but maybe not enough coverage. And some people who may say, hey, I want to be a small business owner, I want to be an entrepreneur, but I don't want to leave my W-2 job because I don't know about this, Affordable Care Act stuff. I need to be covered for real, and we don't want to stifle people's opportunity, their potential, by way of not having systems that work for them. And we certainly don't want to see people whose lives are lying in the balance of a system that isn't quite fine-tuned. And so really kind of focusing on getting those improvements, expansions made, making sure that coverage goes, to the places it really does need to go, and that there is enough of it there. I think it's going to be a priority for me. In addition to, when you look at what's happening with prescription drug costs, we don't talk about that as we should. I still talk to seniors who ration their drugs in the United States because they cannot afford them. There is absolutely no reason we should still be having this conversation as it relates to healthcare, particularly among some of our most vulnerable residents. So healthcare access is still very much front and center to me for the reasons I've described, but also because I think it's low-hanging fruit. I think we can do something about it. I think there are very clear improvements that can be made, and that will have a real impact on someone's ability to live and thrive in our community.
As I was listening to your answer there, I'm thinking this is like a super thoughtful response to this question, but most of the people I see on TV in the Congress, like the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world, aren't super thoughtful people. So why, when Congress is so mired in dysfunction, historic dysfunction, inability to get stuff done, the craziest people are in the spotlight in Congress. Why would a thoughtful, accomplished person want to go over there to Washington right now in this time?
Yeah, I mean, that's what leadership is about. It's not being in the spaces where you're most comfortable. It's being in the spaces where you're most needed. And if you are really going to spark and be a catalyst for change, sometimes that means you're going to be in an environment that needs to get changed, and that is what this is about. And for people and I get asked that question all the time, especially people who know me well, and why on earth would you want to do that? And it's because it's needed. And when you have a certain skill set and you bring a certain voice and you bring a certain perspective and you're passionate about having real impact, that means sometimes you got to go in, on the front lines. And Congress is the front lines of a lot of the dysfunction that's happening in our country right now, and we've got to fix it. So just as we saw and we've seen so much of our democracy being dismantled by the leaders that are being put into place and elected, we can restore that confidence. We can restore the functional nature of our institutions, and we can reconnect with our democratic principles and values. It's all a question of who are we sending to do what, and who's raising their hand and willing and ready to go. And so I'm someone who's raising my hand, and I'm ready. to be a part of that shift that is needed in our community because, quite frankly, we don't need our Congress to be a space for not, cable news entertainment. We need it to be a space for getting work done, saving lives. I come in with a very strong sense of urgency, as I mentioned my personal story. To me, this is personal. When I think about this stuff, this is not a joke. This is not a soundbite for cable news. This is about people's lives, and they're counting on us to get this right every day. And so the when we lose sight of that objective, when we lose sight of the people, we've lost sight of why we take that oath to serve. And so I'm there to help restore some of that focus and of course really drive home some impact that I think will be meaningful in people's lives.
And I'll close with this one. As you run this tough race for Congress, eventually hope to get there to Congress and try to make that impact. I wonder if there's one person, perhaps politically or perhaps, just in your everyday life growing up. I wonder if there's one person whose example you kind of lean on as you take leadership roles.
Well, I think about, and I did not know her, but of course, this seat was once occupied by the late Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. And I think of her and how many times she was the first and only, and how isolated she might have felt it from time to time. And she just had an uncanny, besides for being one of the most powerful orators of her time, she also was someone who was very keen on governance. And when I say that, I think sometimes we lose sight of the governance side of the equation. We think about, I'm going in to fight for X and I'm going in to fight the other side and I'm going in. But how about we go in to get the results? And sometimes that can come in strange packages. And I'm someone who is impact centered and really thinks about just how do we get the results regardless of who's in power. How do I bring home to the district and to the community the impact that I'm talking about on this campaign trail? And so in order to do that, sometimes you got to be creative. Sometimes you got to do stuff behind the scenes. It's not going to always be that big, powerful speech that moves the needle. Sometimes it's what you work, how you compromise and work with the other side to do. You've got to figure out how to be impactful. And I think she did that very, very well. And that's one aspect of her leadership that perhaps gets overshadowed at times by the other powerful elements of her leadership. But I would be that type of voice, that pragmatic leader who will just be there to get stuff done, and get it done. And it's amazing what you can get done when you're not concerned about who gets the credit, I think is a saying, an old adage that I've kind of held closely to me. And I think that it's true, especially in government. But we, in our politics of today, I think have lose sight of things like that. And it becomes, I don't want the other side to prevail. And I understand the strategic implications of why people take those stances. It's just at the end of the day, we still don't have healthcare access for a lot of people. At the end of the day, we're still in a space where people don't have the economic opportunity they need. At the end of the day, we still need to see improvements around voter rights. At the end of the day, we need, women's reproductive rights to be protected in our country. And there's so many things that are so critical and essential that we are losing sight of because of kind of the polarized state of things today. And so I would want to really be that impact focused leader who delivers results, much like Barbara Jordan was able to do.
And with that, that's former Houston City Councilwoman Amanda Edwards. Amanda is running for Congress in Texas's 18th Congressional District. Amanda, thank you so much for joining the program today.
Thank you so much for having me.